Shall I kick off? Thank you, Cyrus. That was a really interesting talk. I'm. This is probably a little bit different to some of the other talks that, especially the last couple of talks that I've joined in, which are about cryptocurrency and blockchain to some. And I'm a doctor, and I can't confess that I have any huge knowledge in blockchain and crypto yet. I've learned a few things by listening in. But what I can share with you is what I think will be the future of healthcare. And I'm sure, can you guys hear me? Are we good?
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. So I'm a doctor, I'm a GP in London. I'm the founder of LMS Wellness and LMS Health. I'll show you a little video of the type of centers that we have. And our mission is around how we can drive the future of healthcare, how we can move health away from being a proxy to disease state to actually saying, okay, look, let's re-engineer health. Let's engineer optimal health. And I think this is, if anything, this is a very, very important message that we can actually engineer health if we look at the right data points and if we work with patients in the right way. And we can move medicine away from being very drug-based to which are drugs and different pills for different ills to all right, how do we support our own biology to work better? So we're going to go dive into all of these things. I can digress a lot, so please bring me back in if I'm I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if there's things that I confuse you with, just pop the messages in the chat, and it's a real pleasure to be so I'm gonna try and share my stuff on Zoom. And last time I did this for a couple of weeks ago, the presentation didn't roll on. So if the presentation doesn't move, tell me. But let's give this a go. You should be able to see my screen. I'm going to just do a little video to give you guys a break as well and just show you 1 minute video of our space. Can you all see this? Okay, so that gives you, that's just a little video, intro video of our clinic and our center. So let's dive into now talking about the science of medicine that underpins it. I'm going to kind of jump between different presentations for this because I also want to introduce you to what some key concepts for supporting your immune system. But let's start with how we got here in the first place. So I think you guys can see me okay. So when we think of aging as a process, we think of ultimately it's a couple of things that are happening in balance. When we're a baby, we're in this kind of pro-optimal or pro-generative state where we're growing our tissues and are growing our organs more so than the degeneration that happens. And then as we get towards older age and we go in our 20s, mid 20s, we stop, we still generate, but we don't generate as much. And our degeneration pathways start to increase. So the amount of our ability to remove toxins decreases, oxidative stress accumulates, inflammation accumulates, DNA mutates, etc., etc. So if we think of aging as a process and health on the same spectrum as disease, that is a really important starting point. Because when we grew up, and particularly when I grew up, one of the things that I would hear a lot from my parents was that you're healthy until you're sick, and when it's your time, it's your time. But we now understand that the process of disease is a process that starts when you're super healthy. Okay, so if we're going to start to understand how we can prevent diseases, how we can live longer and stronger for longer, we need to understand the processes that produce health and take a real engineering approach to health. Okay, so what we started to look at was if, so yeah, if, and let me zoom into this. Okay, so if health is ultimately feeling fantastic, right? What does that mean? What are the different outputs that our biology produces to that means that we feel great? So we came up with what we call 14 outputs of health. They're in this blue circle here. So we say that we have when we feel great, our energy is constant throughout the day. We have reduced inflammation. Our blood sugar balance is pretty steady, and we have good insulin sensitivity. Our cognition, memory, focus, attention is working well. Our body shape, our visceral to subcutaneous fat ratios. Our sleep is deep, it's regenerative. We don't have, our skin is nice and glowy, and we don't have acne, rosacea, pigmentation. Our mood is resilient to stress. Performance after recovery, we perform well for our exercise, and we recover well as well. And our immune system's strong. And when we, we'll dive into that. I'll touch upon the factors that drive a strong immune system, particularly with what's going on in COVID right now. We have an efficient digestion that takes our nutrients and it doesn't give us symptoms. So ultimately, we came out with this model that says, okay, let's look at health as these outputs of health. Then we can start mapping out the inputs or the biological processes that produce those outputs. Yeah, so we started mapping these out from how efficient our digestive system is at removing the nutrients out, etc., etc. So all of these within the green circle are the actual biological processes and pathways that go on. And in the yellow circle is how our biology, which is the green circle, is impacted by the environment within which we put it. So how we eat, how we move, how we sleep, how we stress, all affects our biology. And then that impacts all affects our outputs of health. So it's through this we call a complex systems approach to health that we can really appreciate how real time someone's health is and how much control we can give back to people actually. Let's look at, then the next point is, let's look at the data points we could attach to these biological processes and these three circles. So we said there's four major types of data we look at. One is subjective, so questions around those 14 outputs. Then you got continual wearable data, so things like health wearable metrics. I use an Oura ring. I saw Cyrus before was wearing an Oura ring. I think it's really good. And there are others, but that gives us heart rate variability and other real-time physiology metrics that we can use as goals and that we can learn from as well. So we can say, oh, that works well for us. That food didn't work so well, etc., etc. And this was very broadly speaking. Then you've got static physical measurements of what you can look at from the outside. So things like DEXA, bone scan, your biomechanics, your strength assessments, your blood pressure, ECG, brainwaves, EEG. Then we mapped out these kind of different biomarkers and said, all right, what are the important biomarkers to look at? Where this is basically blood testing, stool testing, and it's a deeper dive into the metrics. And with all of that data sets, and we can start to then understand exactly where you're at on this journey towards disease, right? Oh, sorry. we can basically understand where you're at on this journey toward disease, and then start to personalize therapies off the back of it, which I'll show you in this next presentation here. Okay, so the kind of therapies that we can personalize off the back of it, we've come up with therapies. Our approach is, how do we use therapies that actually upregulate and make your own biology work better? So things like, we can start very simply with nutraceuticals, supplements, herbs, hormones, mushrooms, looking at the whole form of the from nature, really. And we actually derive a huge amount of benefit from using some of these really powerful mushrooms, for example, or herbs. And so we tap into kind of old Eastern, or I say Eastern, but ancient knowledge in naturopathy. And then we tie that into therapies that, for example, ozone therapy is a really powerful antioxidant support therapy, where we can basically inject ozone into your blood. Now, ozone is, you may have heard about it, some people may have heard about it, but ozone is 3 particles of oxygen. It's found in our ozone layer. It's very unstable, but we can generate that through an ozone generator. And when we inject that into your blood, that dissociates into oxygen and reactive oxygen species that causes you to produce really powerful antioxidants. And we know that antioxidants down here are one of the drivers for inflammation. So if we can start to reduce that process of inflammation, to going back to that first slide, the wear and tear, we can support longevity. Interestingly, using heat or cold, so whole body cryotherapy is something that we use, and that's got some really powerful benefits in terms of the physiological responses that your body produces to going into extreme cold. And what's really amazing about our body is how adaptive our biology is. So we can, more often than not, we keep our biology in quite comfortable zones. And what this approach says, that if you can start to move yourself out of these comfort zones, like from whether you start introducing cold water bathing as an example, or as a kind of more medical example, whole body cryotherapy, where you take your body down to -100 up to -140 degrees Celsius, what happens as a response? And you can have these really positive changes that your body adapts to, and you build resilience with. And that's all about taking it out of your comfort zone. And we live very much so. We have to be conscious that we live in these comfort zones nowadays, and we live in this state of extreme convenience, from getting everything coming through on our phone when we need it, being able to deliver food, and particularly even this is an example, like Zoom conferencing, the internet, 5G. It's all going to make things more convenient, more easy. So we have to therefore take more of an active role in making sure we move, making sure we put ourselves outside of our comfort zone, so that our biology stays resilient. And a perfect example of this is with COVID-19, how we're seeing such variability in people's responses to this virus. Some people becoming very, very sick with it, and some people managing to deal with the symptoms and not drive such an inflammatory response. And I think we're going to slowly learn more about why that is. There's certainly got to be a genetic component into it that drives what I think is the likelihood to develop a strong inflammatory response. Okay, so what we've done is we've created a system that looks at ultimately, and that looks at the processes that produce optimal health. We attach data points to it. Then we said, what therapies can we prescribe that are interesting, or what mechanisms can we coach you on to take control of your biology as much as you can. And you guys may have heard of something called biohacking. And biohacking is basically it's described. It's a fun term, but it's really interesting. It basically helps to give people back control of their health. Yeah. So biology hacking, ultimately, how you can hack your biological pathways. So these things that are going on in the green circle, these are just summarized, um, through the yellow circle, through how we sleep, through how we control stresses, through how we move, etc., etc., and they improve our health. So, um, it's a really cool time, for healthcare in many ways, because, as a physician, we're moving away from um, uh, just thinking of health as this, um, as a given, right? And moving towards, okay, how do we produce it? And the science and medicine is there. The science is there now. The medicine, which is the application of that science, needs to catch up, and that's what we're trying to push. Um, Does anyone have any questions at this point before I start to talk about immunity? Because I think it's really important that we have a chat about immunity at some point. I don't know if I'm just going to escape there. Stop this share for a second. Romy, how are you? Okay, all right, sorry. Slightly distracted. I'm also fasting today, guys, so excuse me. I've got really bad dry mouth right now. It's Ramadan, so I'm fasting for Ramadan. All right, cool. So let me share with you this presentation. I'm quickly going to go through some strategies for driving a better immune response during Ramadan. This guide's free and available for all of you guys. You can download it from our website, lms.health, or on our Instagram, lms@lms.health. But ultimately, what we've come up with in this guide is, um, three parts to this guide. Let's just go to this page. So where are you? Okay. And the first part of the guide is explanation of, what causes an immune response. What causes it, what's involved in an immune response, and, the various factors that are involved in producing immunity. The second thing we look at is coronavirus itself, and we look at the virology, so the science of the virus, of how viruses usually work and impact our biology. And then beyond that, how viruses, and beyond that, particularly with COVID, what is so dangerous about it, okay? And then off the back of that, we've come up with some strategies where you at home, where you yourself can take control of your biology, or influence your biology, so that you can build a more resilient immune system and a stronger immune response. Now, let's go into, briefly go into our immune system. It's basically a collection of organs, sorry, so basically a collection of organs and interrelated systems. Okay, so the organs, if you think of the organs as your military bases, they produce your infantry. So things like your bone marrow, which it produces your stem cells at later, when we're sleeping, a lot of our white cells are produced at night. Your thymus is one of your glands that activates your T cells, and then your infantry are your soldiers, and they're actually the white cells that are produced, the B cells, the T cells, and the neutrophils that form part of the immediate response. Okay, so when we're presented with a virus, what happens is, that virus comes into our body, invades one of our cells, and starts using our biological, so our cellular mechanisms to start replicating. Yeah, that virus replicates really, really fast, and then it's a race between our immune system, our initial response, for our infantry, or those cells, to attack those replicating virus cells and kill them. Okay, but what happens is that usually there's a lag, and it takes a few days for us to catch up with, the viral cells. And what's really interesting in COVID-19, and this is where actually the variable symptoms are quite interesting. Let's just see if I can get to COVID-19 quickly. I learn how to navigate this guide better. All right, so basically, what's really interesting is that there is huge variation in symptoms between people, and one of the things that has been posited is the role of viral load when you first get it, i.e., how much of that virus enters your body at the first when you first are exposed to it, can dictate how severe the symptoms you have. Because imagine if I'm exposed to just 2 viral cells, they will replicate into 4, into 8, into 16, versus if I get 50 viral cells, it'll replicate into 100, 200. And so already you're giving your immune a head start. The virus has a head start through that viral load. Now, the second important thing to note is that the strength of your initial immune response will dictate how this viral load will be. So on the y-axis you have viral count, so how much appears in your blood, and on the x-axis is time. So if we can strengthen our initial immune response to support the initial infantry to be able to reduce viral replication, which really is important in the first 5 to 7 days, we will have a better chance. We will have a better chance with the symptoms we'll experience, and less likelihood of going on to the next stage of COVID-19. So there's 2 real stages of this virus that's really important to understand. The first stage is the virus replicating, and the second stage is this hyperinflammation. And the hyperinflammation is phase 2, is a phase 2 response. It doesn't happen in everyone; it happens in some people. And so this is where the genetic component is being explored. So what happens in this hyperinflammation is that the airways, so our lungs, which usually take oxygen from the air that we breathe, pass them into the blood, and the blood delivers that oxygen as a nutrient around to our 23 trillion cells. And at a cellular level, each cell works by taking oxygen, producing energy. What happens when this inflammation is that the blood vessels surrounding the alveoli, so the lungs have lots of little air sacs in it. The blood vessels become leaky, right? And they become leaky because our immune system produces what's known as interleukins, or inflammatory mediators. There's different types, but they produce that as a kind of almost a last-ditch effort to get rid of the virus. So what's important to understand in this virus is not the virus itself that's really dangerous, it's our immune response, or the hyperinflammatory response that we get to the virus 5 to 7 days in, that causes the inflammation, that causes the restriction on our breathing. Yeah, and that's why we then go on to need ventilatory support thereafter. So if we're going to be approaching, I know we haven't got a huge amount of time, but if we're going to be approaching a strategy to treat COVID-19, or to help our immune system not mount that response, we have to be thinking in 2 ways. How do we support the initial phase 1 immune response? And how do we reduce down the likelihood to develop an inflammatory response? And it's really interesting. There's a virologist in Cambridge who was speaking with, and we were talking about how some of the immunosuppressed, so some of the patients with the most weaker immune systems, how they go on to get COVID-19. And with COVID-19, they have flu-like symptoms, which might last longer than normal, 3-4 weeks, but they don't get the difficulty breathing. It's because they're unable to mount that inflammatory response. So there are lots of things we can do, actually. And this is why the experimental drugs that are being used, that are the antiretroviral drugs, they need to be used in the first 5 to 7 days. Um, we hear about hydroxychloroquine and malaria drug. That's really interesting. How that works is it basically helps to take zinc into the cells, and zinc is a really important nutrient that's involved in reducing viral replication, and it's used by the natural killer cells in that initial response. So off the back of this, we came up with recommendations and things that we can do. We really believe that prevention is the only cure right now until there's a vaccine. And so we started to say, all right, what can we do to to support the immune response and calm down inflammation? And we looked at a few things. So sorry, I'm jumping around. We looked at a few things, and one of the first things we want to look at is the role of the gut. The gut has a massive role in supporting immunity. 70% of our immune cells start in the gut. It has two major functions: digestion and defense. So digestion is taking nutrients, core nutrients, out of our food, and over time that happens less efficiently as we age ultimately. Because of something called leaky gut. It's where the junctions between each of the cells start to break down, and the whole food breaks into the blood and drives an inflammatory response. So we can do things to improve gut health, and by improving the bacterial flora of the gut health is one of them. So your microbiome, so that plays a huge role in our immune defense. And then also using food as medicine. So there's a lot of food and nutrients we can do. You know, they're all in the guide. Everything from sources of zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, sources of natural probiotics, natural foods as well. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to take some questions from you guys if you've got any questions. And please feel free to download the guide, spend some time with it. It's really immersive and you'll learn a huge amount. I know, so yeah, I mean, ultimately what we're all about is helping people take control of their health. And there's things you can do at this time to help. But what are your thoughts on the vaccination that is currently trying to be rushed? I think thanks Romy for sharing the link to the website. I think it's clear that we need a vaccination, that we because the people that are immunocompromised will need some support. And what is a vaccination? A vaccination is ultimately inactive forms of the virus, or giving you antibodies passively, giving you antibodies so that you will be able to mount an antibody response. In terms of vaccinations generally, I tend to sit on the fence on this. I haven't done enough research to be able to commit to either way. But I think this example, COVID-19, does show the importance and role and relevance for certain infections for vaccination. But in the meantime, there are things that we can do to support our immune response and our immune system that we should be doing ourselves, and trying. Cool. Any more questions, guys? And if any of you are wondering, that's a hyperbaric oxygen chamber behind me, if you can see it. Yeah, we really believe that hyperbaric oxygen is, it's very simple. It just provides your cells with more oxygen, therefore your cells work better, but has a role in driving longevity. There are some trials of using hyperbaric oxygen in COVID. Okay, so any more questions, feel free to email me, contact us through our website or Instagram and lots of other ways, and continue the cool conversation. All right. Thank you very much.
Are you open to questions right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the hyperoxygen chamber, is it similar to diving chamber? So the pressure is higher?
Exactly, yeah. So it's hyperbaric, so it's high pressure oxygen therapy. Um,
So I have a question about that because
Go for it.
I enjoy diving quite a bit, so I do it often. And I understand with the you have limits as well with oxygen exposure. So what's the kind of barometric pressure you do in the therapies? So
Um,
what's
so,
the percentage of oxygen in the air, for instance?
so yeah, so we give 95% high flow oxygen in the hyperbaric chamber. And that's standard protocol really in when using it as a therapy. But it's quite different to diving medicine because in diving medicine you will stay in the chamber for a lot longer. And with this, you'll be in the chamber for 45 minutes. You know, diving medicine, you would need to be in the chamber for maybe several hours, a lot longer periods of time, and therefore you would be at risk of oxygen toxicity. A really good question. Thanks.